Hello and welcome to Car Dealer Live. My name is James Batchelor. Thank you very much for joining us for these daily broadcasts on the Car Dealer Magazine YouTube channel, where we talk to people right across the industry. Now, today, I'm delighted to say we've got Tony Roberts from Horizon Magna Motor Group on the show. Hello, Tony.
Yes, hello, James. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for taking some time out today to join us. We really do appreciate it. Now, Tony is the CEO of Horizon Magna Motor Group. It's a dealer group that has had decades of history in the south of England with Mitsubishi, Honda and Nissan franchises. It's with Mazda, though, where they are the most well-known, arguably, with dealerships spread across Hampshire, Dorset and Wiltshire. Last year, Horizon Motor Group turned over £88 million. Now, Tony himself has had a long career in the motor industry and has been with the firm for 33 years. And he's been in his current role for 22 of those years. So he is the perfect man to tell us more about the history of the business and trading and how trading has been during the coronavirus. Now, I've got plenty of questions to ask Tony in the next 20-25 minutes or so. If you've got anything to ask, then please do drop it into the comments box and I'll do my best to ask it to Tony. But let's start with mine. So hello, Tony. Let's start with a question which every dealer wants to know at the moment. How has June been for you?
A massive amount of fear and trepidation, James, as we came into it. The unknown, the fear of the unknown, probably, as far as that's concerned. If you'd have asked me 22 days ago, would I have accepted the sales figures that we produced today? I would have probably ripped your arm off, I think it's fair to say. It has started incredibly well, particularly on used cars. New cars, not quite as encouraging, but certainly if I look at it, when I took numbers on Monday, we had done 190 used cars. Now, to put that in context, last year in the full month of June, we did 227. So 84%-ish of used car performance with 10 days to go in the month was very pleasing. And in truth, as importantly, the margins were holding up well there because some of that stock had obviously been in since post-lockdown situation. So again, revitalizing that and getting it back to the forecourt. So I think, as in I know many other dealers that I've spoken to have been very, very encouraged by how June has come back. Will it last, though?
That is the question, isn't it? But let me just pick up on something you just said there then about new car sales. Do you envisage those picking up between now and September? Or do you think that they're just going to sort of like bubble along?
Well, we're over 50% of where we were for June 19, June 20 on new cars. And coming from a standing start, I think, on new is a longer incubation period, as I would call it, from initial inquiry from a customer to transaction is longer on obviously a new car than is on a used car. I sincerely hope new cars come back. There are some supply issues certainly around some of that. You know, we've had factories that have been shut. We've had distribution companies that have furloughed staff. So again, getting the vehicles from our manufacturing partners has been difficult and everything as well. So whilst I think new cars are going to be a challenge and possibly a challenge for the rest of 2020, I think we've got to take a lot of encouragement on how well that has started as well. And as the manufacturers gear up with supply and their very sophisticated marketing machines, I hope to see that incrementalize over the coming weeks and months.
Yeah. Do you envisage there being a lot of incentives, especially in August time, to try and make September a good month?
I think September will be probably more important than it has ever been. You know, March was cut short. So our two peak months of the year, March, you know, when sadly the pandemic hit, had curtailed a lot of registrations out of March. So the opportunity will definitely be to try and regain some of that business in September. I think the consumers, with a level of uncertainty in the job market, will need to be incentivized to come and purchase new motor cars, to make a commitment on finance payments for those cars for the coming years. So yes, I think it is going to be very important to see which manufacturers support their products in the right way. And I think by and large, from the four manufacturers we represent, each of them in their own different ways have certainly come up with what on the face of it seem very, very compelling offers.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see which manufacturers are actually moving forwards with their dealer network and having them, supporting them and helping them in this. You would presume that they'd be doing those kinds of things, but it's not always a guarantee, is it? But especially with the brands that you're working with, I was talking to Mazda last week, and they do seem to be very on board. They're listening to their dealers a lot, and definitely do intend on supporting them through this, because nobody could have expected it, could they?
No. If any of us could have foreseen this, we expect downturns in businesses. We see economics go up and down, which have an impact on it. But I don't think any of us had perhaps envisaged a pandemic, sadly. But yes, if you're looking at partnerships, you're looking at Jeremy and Peter Alabon at Mazda. I'm looking at how they've come out very early, how they've supported the dealerships through this, how they then come out with a voucher for existing customers to try and get some early interest back. I think they certainly added a level of pragmatism and trying to get the job done really as early as they're able through what will be a challenging Q3, I don't doubt.
Yeah. So how, before March, in January and February, how was the year sort of panning out for you?
The year that never was, James. Insofar as January, after a difficult 2019 back quarter, I thought, wow, we hit the ground running, and I was possibly getting ahead of myself, which is a famous mistake there. Pride coming before a fall. But January and February, March pre-order take was looking great. I got all my charts out, and I thought to myself, I'm going to see some growth here. This is all fine, as I was nearing the end of our financial year. And then sadly, as March started to unravel, we started to see obviously the difficulties that were happening in the pandemic in Italy and Spain. And I think it started to dawn on one, this had become very, very serious at that given point in time. And then when obviously we had towards the latter part of March, and perhaps misguidedly, we were still charging on and trying to do as much business as we were able. But then when you're getting a government statement that tells you one night your dealerships are shutting tomorrow morning, and you're talking a business that's in its 50th year, and you're having to send the best part of your 220 workforce home at that given point in time, wow, is that a sobering moment and a real difficult thing to perhaps understand and accept. But nonetheless, it had to be done. We've done it. And yes, I think if you'd have spoken to me then, my level of enthusiasm would have been at a different point to which it is today, I think it's fair to say.
Mm. No, it's very sobering you saying that the statement comes out saying your dealerships are closing tomorrow, and at the beginning of March, perhaps we were all very naive, don't know what it was, but none of us could really grapple with the idea that by the end of the month everything was going to be shut, and March pretty much was panning out as normal, really, wasn't it? And then it was the stop button or the pause button.
Yeah, and there are then many other factors that come into play that, you've got where you're furloughing staff, you're having to discommunicate them from the business because they are furloughed, taking email addresses down from them from that point of view. And again, it's not just the human cost, that the awful mortality rate that you're sitting and looking at as far as the television is concerned. It's the emotional well-being of some of those colleagues suddenly feeling isolated that have been immersed in the business a long time, and you had those difficulties to overcome. You're then also looking at how long was that lockdown going to last. Initially we were being prescribed 3 weeks. I perhaps never had any feeling it was going to be that long, but you were also then looking, and you're having to sort of look at contingent plans to say, well, how long can we survive this? We're a long-established business with, I like to think, a strong balance sheet, that we learned lessons from the financial crash of 2009, that we would be ready for this. But when you go from turning over sort of £7.5 million a month to go to a lockdown month like April, where you turn over nothing, nada, that's a very, very different place to a recessionary pressure on your business. That goes to nothing. You've still got overheads. They're still coming in fast and furiously around that time. So that's the difficulty, and those are the challenges that myself and many others have obviously had to face over these last few months.
What percentage of your workers have you been able to bring back or furlough?
At this given moment in time, we have the figures that are given to me every day by my HR lady, and literally I'm speaking to every single site to say, bring back. We're at 82% returned now. So out of our complete workforce, we've got less than 40 furloughed as I speak to you today.
So that is pretty good. So you've obviously brought those people back because there's a need for them at the moment to try and get back to some kind of normal. So that's pretty good, really, 80 odd percent.
Yes, I'm pleased with that. It's, my optimism has returned. I think June has thankfully put faith back in that one hopes the business has been paused rather than stopped and has to be restarted to that level. I don't doubt, sadly, as probably many others, will have to consult at some stage as the furlough comes to its end to what level of magnitude we can bring back all of our 220 workforce back to the business. And that's going to be the next round of difficulties, I don't doubt, that I face, and I know many others are saying similar things within the trade press. But it is important, and I think we've seen an interesting dynamic sort of paradigm shift in the last week particularly. The first 2 weeks of June was very much customers coming in as long as your protocol, your PPE, everything was in place in the dealership by appointment only. In the last week since retail has opened back up again, James, we've seen customers actually then, well, if I can walk into Primark and I can walk into that store, I can just walk into a car dealership in the same way to which I did previously. So we've certainly seen less appointments and a higher level of footfall coming into the dealerships, particularly in the last week.
And that's an interesting point, actually. So how do you deal with that? Because of course you've followed government guidelines in putting certain practices in place with social distancing, screens, hand sanitizer. So you've sort of, for want of a better word, you've budgeted for a certain number of people to be coming into the showroom. How has it been having to not only deal with those customers, but people trying to walk in as well? Has it been a bit of a challenge?
Well, that has been the enormous challenge, because we'd seen, if we look at traditionally, the motor industry converts 30% of the customers that come to a dealership. During the first 2 weeks of reopening, we saw our conversion rates go up to 60-something%, because then the people that were making appointments were very serious. If they were facing the challenges of going out into the environment, going into a dealership, then they seriously wanted to buy a motor car. Now we've seen the footfall almost double in the last week. We're having to bring more people back off furlough to then cope with that, because with the level of staffing that we had up to that point wasn't sufficient to service and to greet those customers in an appropriate way, James.
Yeah. And I would presume that by cutting the 2 meter rule down to 1 meter, it's just going to increase this idea in people's minds that we're back to normal. And if you can walk into Primark, you can walk into a car dealership, can't you?
Yeah, my own view of that is that we've put such an enormous effort into reducing cars in the showroom, creating one-way systems, marking the showroom floor areas, marking the windows for 2 meter, putting masks, gloves, hand sanitizers in all the appropriate places as entry and exit of all of the dealerships. And I've been around every single one checking that we're meeting that criteria. I actually think we should carry on with that until we see this thing go a little bit further, because I understand incredibly difficult for a pub to meet a 2 meter social distancing thing. If we're talking about showroom sizes of 400 square meters and the amount of people that we have visiting our showrooms, I actually think we can adhere to the 2 meters reasonably comfortably without causing any customer anxiety issues, and there's no reason for us to do so.
Yeah. And really, if you're talking about 1 meters, it's not really much of a distance, is it, between the salesperson and the customer? And we are going to get to a stage where, despite our best efforts, that contact is just going to get closer and closer, isn't it? And it's going to make a bit of a mockery of the rules.
Well, I drove past certainly a store which will remain nameless in Bournemouth the other day when I was going between our site and Paul and Christchurch. And the people that were queuing outside, and the store had marked on the pavement the distance that they should be adhering to. it was almost like watching a crowd of people working a football match. They were all convened together in numbers. You know, I'm talking tens of people. I think we've got to be very careful that this pandemic has had an awful effect economically on businesses, on people's lives and everything else. We must be careful how we come out of this to try and avoid a second spike of this, because the last thing any of us need is to go back into a lockdown situation again. And we're seeing certain isolation. I think Germany, I was seeing on the news this morning, that had had a spike of that and they've had to lock down a certain area. So I think we've got to be optimistic. Life's returning to some sense of normality, but I think we've got to be equally cautious as well, James.
Yeah, that would be pretty much devastating for the car industry, really, wouldn't it? Because like we've just been talking about, June has been a surprise for everybody. But then if we go into a second lockdown, coming out of that second lockdown, we can be pretty much guaranteed that there won't be a similar kind of activity we've had in June the second time round.
Well, we're in an industry that works on very small margins. We're in an industry that sadly, probably since April and May, has been burning money to a more or large extent, depending on how established and how well-heeled any business group is or not. If we're looking at the March scenario, it's probably the last time any of us had an income of any sort coming in. For us to go into another lockdown situation, I think it could sadly be the death knell for a certain number of retailers. And I'm not just specifically talking of the motor industry here.
Yeah. With test drives, have you found that customers are still willing to take them, or have they been quite reluctant to do them?
We with all the sort of PPE, everything that we're trying to achieve, we've got a sanction from our insurers that we are allowed to run a company test drives. Obviously, we vet the customers as well as we're able to do as far as that's concerned. Customers actually are okay with that. Now, it isn't the sort of level of test drive that I would like. I would have normally liked the salesman to have driven the car, explained the features and benefits appropriately. And we've had to work in a different way, show them videos of how all the controls work prior to them taking a car. Because again, we've got a duty of care to somebody driving that car down the freeway and knowing where all the controls are on the car. We've got, and I'm sitting here at my desk thing, and I'll show it to you. We've got our little sanitized and sealed stickers that are stuck over all of our motor cars. And again, that's just adding confidence to a customer that they're taking a car out that has been properly sanitized since they were last doing it. We're putting air con purges in every single used car because that kills 99% of any MERS, SARS or coronaviruses. So it's trying to make sure that the customers understand we are doing more than perhaps they would expect to see if they went into the local Sainsbury's or grocery store, for that matter.
Yeah, and I suppose you can deal with all of those things. You can make customers feel reassured that cars are properly sanitized, they're safe, when you're running an appointment-based system. But when you're not, and you've got appointment customers and you've got people walking in, trying to get those cars cleaned, sanitized, and to reassure everybody, that must be a huge challenge.
Massive. I mean, certainly we're taking on more cleaner drivers. That's an area of the business, and part of that is for collection and deliveries, because there are customers that still rightly at a certain age, maybe a vulnerable health category, want the car picked up from home, want it brought back, and we certainly put a protocol in place to deal with that. But there is the difficulty. Whilst we have markings on the floor and one-way systems, and by and large, 90% of people adhere to all of that, others walk in as if the world hasn't changed whatsoever in the last 12 weeks. And, you try and be as polite as you're able and say, would you like to use the hand sanitizer? And people, oh, no, I don't need to. Would you like to? So, and it's just difficult. But I'm sure as each business adheres to that and guides to that way, the customers will react, I'm sure, in the fullness of time, 100%.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about something a little bit a nicer topic to chat about. Let's talk about the history of the business. Now, it's been running for decades, hasn't it? So just give us a history of the business.
Yeah, well, the site that I'm talking to you from now is our Honda site in Poole, at Ringwood Road in Poole, which our chairman purchased when it was Dean of Dorset and started its journey as Horizon Motor Company 49 years ago, 50 years next April. And so, we've had the Honda a long, long time. You consider how long they've been in the UK. And then in 1983, we took on the Mazda franchise for Poole, and we expanded with that, as you touched on earlier. And then I think 13 years ago when we took on the Nissan franchise in Dorchester, and then 7 years ago when we started our Mitsubishi relationship. So bizarre, they're all Japanese franchises as it happens. But maybe,
I was just going to say that.
Love
Japanese products.
Well, we certainly do. I mean, there is no question about it. The engineering integrity of each of those manufacturers, and they all have their own things. But I think we are in a time, and it's strange when you're having to kind of re-engineer and rethink the business and every opportunity through, but it's coming at a time where, with cafe legislation, with Brexit legislation coming through, the proliferation of electric models in the United Kingdom, Honda E coming out next month. We've launched this month the hybrid version of the Jazz and the Jazz Cross Star. And we've had CX-30, the mild hybrid, came out of Mazda earlier this year. We've already got Leaf, obviously, with Nissan. And actually, what we've got to remember is not to lose sight of the opportunities and the seismic changes that are coming in the market as we try and bring emissions down and meet those CAFE legislation and the changes that are going to come about to the consumer for that. I mean, we've launched a Honda Jazz where we've given customers 3 options. You know, we'll either bring the car to you and adhere to all the social distancing, properly sanitized and everything. You can have a private showing in the showroom and we'll open the showroom at a specific time for you. Or we'll do a video walk around live with you and walk around the vehicle with you. And that's not how we've ever launched a car before. We'd have a very nice evening with a brass band playing or whatever, and we bring 300 or 400 people to the dealership. So we know that sort of environment has gone and isn't likely to return anytime soon.
Yeah. Now there is a general feeling in the industry at the moment that this has catalyzed change, hasn't it? It's whether from simple things like the way you launch a car for a dealer evening to more complex systems like your website and being able to support video and live chat and all these things. In many ways, it's catalyzed for the better, really, hasn't it? It's brought some much needed change to our industry.
The e-commerce side of our business, and thankfully we have a very competent lady that handles the e-commerce side of our business, but it's certainly fair to say during lockdown, we were looking at things that we needed to do differently. And we were looking at distance selling. We were having inquiries. We had an inquiry on an ASX Mitsubishi from North Yorkshire. And I worked about 331 miles away. You know, I mean, that's a long way to travel. And we were looking at Auto Trader and how and what. But it was interesting. We then started looking at video and saying, well, if people are buying and they're prepared to buy from a franchise dealership remotely over the phone, then we got to have more than 9 or 20 photographs. We've got to have videos. And it was at that stage, one of my far more technically minded young sales managers came to me and said, we needed a gimbal. I mean, at that stage, I thought it was a character out of Lord of the Rings, if I'm being honest. But it turned out it was how we facilitated doing the videos on used cars. And he's taken it upon himself to become a bit of a Steven Spielberg. And we're trying to get that skill set out around the group. And our mission is that by the end of next month in July, every single one of the 257 cars we have advertised will have a video of each and every vehicle, which is a standard which I think will become the norm as we go forward.
Yeah. And it is, and especially during lockdown, that has been sort of the only way you've been able to sell cars or to communicate with customers. And really, that's only just going to increase, isn't it? Because as people start to get used to, working from home more, not going out quite so much, doing more stuff online, they're going to want to transact and buy buy cars online, aren't they?
Without a doubt. I mean, if you're in your street of an evening and you're seeing how many grocery vehicles from different grocery stores are turning up at your neighbours bringing their shopping around and everything else, I can't see that is going to change because people will then reevaluate and think, well, do I want to go and actually push a cart around Sainsbury's for 2 hours of a Friday evening or whatever? It's far easier just getting them to deliver it to my door and being done with that. So I think as the high street has revolutionized in the last 20 years, the motor industry is going to change exponentially in the next 5 years, I think, James.
Do you think that will impact your business? I mean, not at this present moment in time, because we don't know what's going to happen, but do you think this will change your sort of plans of perhaps expanding with more physical sites?
It's interesting. I looked and thought, well, how do I drive additional revenue? What will be the changes in the coming months? And I was looking at our dealerships and thinking, well, okay, if we're able to sell on average 215 used cars a month off a stock of 257, so we're turning our stock about 10 times a year, how do I get another 50 cars displayed? And look where we hold compounds next to franchise dealerships, and do we put the compounds and store the vehicles elsewhere and then purchase another 50 used cars at a cost of 600,000, but turn those over 10 times a year? And that's going to be a change for us. And I don't doubt, and I wouldn't blame them for a moment, there was a lot of talk of manufacturers rationalizing their partners. It was well known with Honda looking to go from 150 partners down to 100 partners. I think a lot of the plans of the right sizing or downsizing, call it what you will, but I think a lot of the manufacturers will now look in the next 24 months and say they need to adjust the size of their retail networks. You know, Vauxhall have done it fairly famously. Ford have said they're going to be doing it. So I personally think if we were having this conversation in 3 or 4 years' time, there will be a good number of less franchise dealerships in the United Kingdom. Doesn't mean I think there'll be less dealerships. I think they will find other opportunities to create income.
Yeah, yeah. I touched upon it in the intro, but you've had a long and distinguished career in the motor industry.
Failed car mechanic, I think, is how they would describe me, James.
Well, you look good in a shirt and tie, so it doesn't. If you could this is my last question now. If you could go back to when you started out and give yourself one piece of advice, I mean, putting aside Corona will come along in 2020, what would your advice be to yourself?
Yes, it's that somebody once told me, if you're the same man at 50 that you were at 20, you'd wasted 30 years. So I think in all honesty, I would probably say, don't sweat the small stuff and just remember to talk to your people.
Brilliant. Perfect way to end. Thank you very much indeed, Tony. Thank you very much for taking time to come to talk to us. That was a really interesting chat. Thank you. Tomorrow we have Lipsum Cars MD, Peter Barnes, and you can find the full schedule of Car Dealer Lives on our website. If you want to get involved in a show like this, then please do email me, james.batchelor@blackballmedia.co.uk, or you can email James Baggett, james@blackballmedia.co.uk. If you want to have some breaking news sent to your phone, we've got Car Dealer Magazine WhatsApp groups as well, where we share the most important stories. So please do get in touch with us if you want the links to those. Thank you again, Tony, for giving up your time, which just leaves me to say thank you very much indeed, and see you tomorrow. Thank you.